We'll get going, if that's okay with you.
Yes, absolutely.
So, just briefly announce our guest tonight, Daniel Vasini, who we're thrilled to have here at the school as a visiting critic. Actually, I have your official bio, and I'll read that briefly, but Daniel was a student of Michael Speaks at SCI-Arc, and he has taught with Michael at the University of Kentucky. You did a workshop with Kyle and Angie Coe.
Yes.
So he has known the dean longer than any of us. And Michael and Daniel's very, very busy. He is the creative director at West 8, which, as you probably know, is one of the most important landscape architecture practices today for landscape architecture and urban design. They have offices in Rotterdam. We visited last fall with our advisory board, and they have a small office in New York City. And so other than that, he graduated from SCI-Arc, granted a Fulbright in 2004 by the Institute of International Education, and as I said, he practices as creative director, working closely with Adriaan Geuze. He's focused on conceiving designs and creating landscapes that are unique to their location and establishes identity as second nature. He has led internationally recognized projects with a multidisciplinary approach, shifting scales from strategic master plans to transformative park designs, followed by iconic public spaces, which accommodate 21st century infrastructure needs and the challenges of urbanization. Prior to joining West 8, you worked as SOM, Student Lawrence and Merrill, in Chicago and London. And Daniel is also the recipient of the Medal Prize for the Maison of Puerto Vallarta in the category of Best Urban Design Project. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you. Thank you. How much time do you have?
45 minutes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. It's a little bit crazy how quick this goes. This is tomorrow my last studio day, and then next week we have the review. So I want to thank the students that are here today. I'll try to be brief in an hour. If I don't manage to finish, I will stop a project earlier, so I have to measure. I try to do. I made about 356 lines, similar stress. But hopefully with the topic and the subject of today's lecture, which I title Acceleration, we can just go through this very quickly. I'm happy to be here in the list with Mr. Koolhaas, but in this case, Thomas Koolhaas, so getting closer to that. And this is our studio pit downstairs. I think we've been doing a phenomenal work. I really like to be here because when Michael invited me to be part of this exercise, he gave me freedom. And I think universities really need to support the freedom of thinking and the universe where we can all debate about our ideas. And we've been focusing with the students, really teaching the scale. And I think tonight I'm going to evoke my conversation specifically to allure all of you who are not yet decided if you'd like to become an architect, landscape architect, or an urbanist. Let's see where that goes and how your career evolves. This is some of the guests that I invited for the mid-review. Everybody wants to come to New York, so they pay themselves their ticket. So and this is Danielle Willems. She actually also studied with me in SCI-Arc. And on the right and the left, or in the end, we have Nick Notes from architectural workshop room in Brussels, and he gave a lecture. And here we have Dan McAfee and the other one, Alice Shea from Bloomberg Associates. So they were all providing critiques, and it's also very important for me to bring a new generation. I really appreciate the support of Michael. This is some of the students. I really like some of these plans. So really quickly, I was really impressed. I was trying to teach them how fast you need to perform in the real life. Obviously, studio, I do think it's a little bit outdated. Studio takes too long. It's good to think, but it's also to have quick results as well if you want to perform. Unless you want to become academic, then that's fine. But I think we need to be prepared. But I really think it's a matter of debate. So really quickly, look, a student that never studied landscape architecture all of a sudden was, learning from the masters and really carefully studied all of the great American cities, and we were documenting each one of them. So I was really impressed to see the detail that in less than a month was already coming out on the resolution. And if you zoom in, this plan is almost mathematical with that Asian precision and tetrix, and I feel really proud of what they have done. And they overcome the masters is really phenomenal. And the way how they place the trees and they treat the grids and the work, I think they don't really recognize yet what they have in their hands, maybe in a couple of years. And it's been a great experience. So let's see how the second phase of the studios evolve, and I'm really happy with the outcome thus far. But what I really appreciate here is the freedom to explore and understand the scale. This is what I work. My background, as Julia mentioned, I am an architect, but actually I do not practice as an architect. Since I graduated, I was debating with my teachers that I do not want to do architecture again. I didn't know where I was heading, but I was definitely in love with the scale, and I was in love with the urban, and that's why I went to meet Michael in SCI-Arc to really study the metropolitan research and design, trying to avoid architecture as much as possible, but indeed understanding the scale and the metrics of the cities. So I'm really passionate about cities, and therefore I fall into urban design and landscape architecture after being working in our state for about 10 years. So we shift a little bit of location. The first planned city in America, Philadelphia, city of squares, symmetry. And we jump into Rotterdam. This is our latest square. It's been a while in Europe since the latest square was open. So we feel very proud that this square over here, which is in front of Rotterdam Centraal, I thought, let me start with a little bit of architecture for architecture students. And Rotterdam Centraal, you see here a square that happens for two reasons. One, because it's a city that is funding the square, so it's not development driven, and in that kind of the social party sponsors open spaces, which is spaces for people to meet, which is critical in society to not bubble ourselves. Therefore, diversity and exchange can happen on the public space, fundamental for the evolution of us as species. And I think it's really critical in this case. It's supported by the government, obviously, with a social background, so taxpayers pay for this, and there are no interests in terms of development pressures because they want to prevail that the square is there for the people. And the second layer, obviously, is history. You say, what kind of history? But in this case, is that little building, which you see right here. It's a historic building. Was the first building with a garage embedded in it. It's the Hengelsgebouw. And we have to respect the reason why the roof is actually setting back to allow that visual. But what is very beautiful about doing squares is that opportunity for creating manifestation. That was the day of the opening where the king comes in. So although we don't want to be formal, we want to be the square open for any kind of interpretation, people immediately organize themselves when hierarchy comes in and the axis appears for in this case, the king, who is about to enter the station. Or it can also be empty as a void, and what is very nice as a square is allowing the setback and an opportunity. So it's been more than 15 years that in Rotterdam a new square didn't show up on the map of Rotterdam as a new open space. So I think it's really critical in the public space design, and it's very hard for us to get commission for a new square. It's really, really random, obviously, in the profession. Now, you might say, what has to do the square with this architecture and the roof? But what we really celebrate about this square is really the opportunity to have people to meet what I was saying. You don't have, per se, a bench. People just sit down in these planters, and it's something very fascinating because people don't feel anymore intimidated, and that's part of kind of the anthropological aspects of landscape architecture. You just sit next to the other. While if it's in a bench and it's too tight, you feel uncomfortable. You say, no, this person's too weird, and you move on. So I think it's really interesting, the fact of providing edges for sitting. And that's part what I learned in landscape architecture, which architecture didn't teach me, but it has been always there. People take over the space. And then how the station actually performs, in this case, providing unity between the city or the urban tissue. So now here we jump, how we use the architecture to jump into the macro scale. And we were really interesting because, as you can see, the rail tracks are really dividing the two cities. The provincial city, which is in the back, Provenierswijk, and in the front, the metropolitan Rotterdam city. And what the station is performing as is a symbol of here we are, of an identity or a specific city for the 21st century, connecting Rotterdam with Amsterdam and Paris. This is really the future. And this is what now Silicon Valley is trying to push for. And we feel very proud to be part of this. Why? Because in 20 minutes from this station, I'm in the gate of my airplane, and I can be in 9 hours in San Francisco. And that's really the future. Something that I cannot achieve today in the first city of the world, capital of the world, which is New York. And I think there is something behind this that I think hopefully starts to transform. And I think our generation is the one who's going to profit from it. For example, with the efforts that the high-speed train is trying to do between LA and San Francisco. Here you can see some of the parameters that is actually driving the architecture, where you see this canopy, and the canopy is actually set back, pushed back, so a little bit of you who understands architecture, you have to play with the zoning and the metrics on how you lay out a specific building. But here you can see the shift condition, how the canopy starts to respond to the context. And I think it's very fundamental. But it's also celebrating, and in this case, there's always hidden message in our kind of architecture, which is the narrative. And we as landscape architects, that's what we bring. Architecture is boring. And we try to bring narrative to architecture. And that's why the measure of the two is really when you achieve something that you never see. In this case, it's pointing. This is hidden, of course. You don't find this in the book. But this is pointing to the city center of that city that actually is now stop and rising. But for many, many years was completely ignored, and Rotterdam's really had an identity. And the identity is, yes, is to be loud, is to scream, is to say who we are, and we're looking into the future, and the future is looking also into the past. This is Scarborough Plain, which many of you know, this was our first project. But in this interpretation of landscape as an art exhibit, we're trying to create the flames of what happened in the past in Rotterdam. And that roof canopy is actually pointing to that city center that was erased, in this case by the Nazis when they bombed Rotterdam. And you can have here a painting of that era. This is the result. This is that city center that was erased, less, that 100 years. This is in a lifetime of a person. And they experience before and after today, and this is the result of the war. And actually, in one of our projects that we did in the past, but here you can see in white the footprint of that bombing that took place. Actually, the station is right at the end, so it's at the beginning, and that canopy is actually pointing at that city that was bombed and trying to tell into the society what happened. All the things that also occur in public space design, this is what you can see, Zedinsky, which is an art which is in this case kind of the Picasso of the Netherlands. He was positioned there in this was the last public square actually in the Netherlands, very modern, and you can see the social housing taking place in the mid-50s. But what I was trying to say that the success of this square, although it's pretty plain and it has nothing to do with Piazza Navona, was to bring that statue to the square of Rotterdam, because for the first time the Rotterdammers felt an identity with a square. Here is a project that we did actually where we acknowledged that footprint of the erased memory of Rotterdam by creating and bringing some sort of lights. And we were inspired again in Zedinsky to actually absorb the art which is already there, and we are pretty much fascinated. We think he cheated a little bit with the Guernica of Picasso and stole his hand to be able to become Zedinsky, and I think there's some reference in place, but we took him and we created this with this flame, which is actually mimicking the fire that burned down Rotterdam, and tried to place these light bulbs together with Philips on the whole periphery where the city was bombed. So actually these are coincidences that when you evolve, let's say in the work, at some point these layers, they come to a confluence, and it was just a coincidence. We first started with this project, and this project then overlapped with the project of Rotterdam Centraal Station, and it all comes together by coincidence in time. And you can see here in green the areas that were not bombed, and actually there are some buildings that are actually historic and still in the city center, but some others are not. This is the opening of the celebration, trying to create a little bit of Batman feeling. But at the end of the day, we found out, and we felt very proud, how the people themselves took ownership of the public space. And this is an artist's impression that was on the internet that I actually captured while I was watching the documentation and the progress of the station. I personally experienced the station at Rotterdam before and after the station, and actually went through the whole process. But what we feel really proud about this station is actually to see that the people took ownership, and they were all claiming, because they were actually playing with the artist Oleafor to bring an Oleafor art exhibit, but the people didn't, no, we want to bring Zedinsky, which is our identity, and we want Zedinsky to be actually in the public square. This is how you feel when you come out of the canopy, which is protecting you, and you can feel the warmth of the roof pointing into the city center. There are some things that we actually capture from the old stations, people recognize, and that's really important in part of the narratives, which is the clock, the old clock, so we recycle the clock. We also recycle the central station title, and that's also part that people recognize. Although you have a new station, you keep the same letters, and that was actually very effective to people feel ownership about what they're seeing. This is the old station, so you can see the difference. And one of the reasons why they actually changed the modern station into a 21st century station is because of capacity of trains and the canopy of the trains. So trains from Paris to Amsterdam could no longer get through because the canopy was quite low, and these double deckers, they need a specific capacity. But here you can see the modern station. These are the lessons learned why there is a square, but it's very simple. Look at this. This is what we find today in JFK, which I completely dislike. You come out and there are cabs, right? And there's no identity, it's so great, there's not even a single tree. Where's the tree? Nothing. Then you come out and there are buses or Ubers or whatsoever. Then you come out and then there's all this tram station and there's a canopy, they're lost, you don't know where you're going, and then you're here and this is the welcome to the city. And that's what happens, you know, in the 50s. And I think what was for us very important is to actually to say, no, let's clean everything up. This is what construction. So we took away all of the squares and we say, okay, in the left side, the buses. On the right, we put the trams, and we give the opening of the welcome arrival to the people when they come through. We also, different from Amsterdam, we're a little bit fed up about the bicycles on the public space. They really pollute the space. I know it's a signature in Amsterdam. As soon as you come, you say, wow, how great, those bikes. But it's really polluting the space. So here we made a statement to actually make a multimodal station where you have the metro, but have all of this great capacity to allow more than 2,500 bikes. You can see the canopy pointing out to the city center. You can see here the idea that we do not create a passage, but we create a serious hall that feels the grandiose feeling, so you never feel a UPenn station feeling. And you can come through it and you feel pretty wide. So although you have this big canopy, visually you can connect through the to the provincial city, to the modern city throughout that passage. And if you see this here, this section, this was the previous station passage. So you can compare the difference of how wide and how grandiose that will feel. And we kept that as a recycle, the former, let's call it concourse for bike path connections. And here you have all the belts and coming above. And I'm just going to flip very through, and then the canopy of the station. So here you can see the biker passing through the former concourse, which is this. So this used to be the former concourse. We designed a station that we say and we promised to the minister that we're going to deliver the station while operating. So we were not doing the Calatrava effect where you build a station elsewhere and then you close the other one. But you have to work with sustainability and engineering to make that happen. And that concourse is what we call recycling infrastructure, which is part of what we do and what we brought to the table, and was very effective because people like the Highland or Times Square likes to avoid the crowd. So if I'm a neighbor and I want to cross my station and I don't have to deal with the amount of people through my corridor, you just do it on expressways, and there are 2 of those available for you. Here, another major component is to extend, although it's an illusion, but to extend the green artery, which is coming from the romantic Olmstedian, for calling it here in America, approach, to bring it all the way out and connect to the single, which is in Amsterdam you have canals, in Rotterdam you have single, which is the same, but in the modern and romantic way with the green and lawn and slopes. And for us, this really was the breakthrough. So this is the single, the Rotterdam single, and you can see it's very romantic and have sculptures and greens and the tramway track, and then connects to the esplanade and arrive all the way to that canopy that sometimes they call it the Elvis lip. And in the back of the canopy, you can see that relationship of scale. So the metropolitan canopy is actually very open and wide, and it's actually expressing very loud, you know, here we are, while the back one is actually more modest and is relating to the scale of the city. Again, the word scale is super relevant in all matters of discipline. And I think it's really critical for us to explain a little bit about the conceptualization of this canopy, which is all about Rembrandt and the tradition of light, but also the tradition of glass houses. And for us, it was very critical to work with what we have, not importing every single material, but the Netherlands is very well known for the production of glass houses. So all the glass is made actually in the Netherlands, and it's all based on modules of glass houses. And here in the traditional pinch roof house, Frontier in the back side of the station, which is also considered a front side. No doors are always completely open. And all of this is still in construction, but all of this is completely erased out. All the roads are completely out, only for the allowance of drop-offs and so on, to be able to connect to that green romantic city that is going to now kiss the station. Here you can see that effect of lighting that I was speaking through. So for us in the Netherlands, it's actually very gray and cloudy most of the year. We actually crave for light every moment. It's also another effect which is partially hidden in the architecture, is the fact that these columns, in the Netherlands, the Rotterdammers are very well known because they're very tough and harbor people, and they're very sad and they elbow with each other. But since the station of Cure, we really want to change the conception and the statement of the people. So there's a lot of anthropology hidden in architecture. So if you do good architecture, it's good people. If you do bad architecture, I don't know what can become. But this is a very simple thing, and it's the illusion. We were very jealous every time we go to Paris. There is people is kissing, you know. It's amazing. So for us, it's really critical that there is some sort of, let's say, memory of people welcoming to the station and open arms, and even the seduction of maybe coming under the legs. So there is some sort of columns with open legs and open arms, which you can actually choreograph. And this is another layer that landscape architects together with architects can actually bring on board. Here you can see is everything is well thought out. So sometimes we have dark colors, but these panels here in white are really critical because they really perform as receivers of light, and they reflect a refractor of light. So really allow us to have a very bright corridor. And you can see how wide it feels, full with shops, and it's all part of an opening, and it's no longer feeling claustrophobic, and light comes through all the way from that roof canopy. Another layer, which I think in a kind of expression of Rotterdam, is that the rooftop for us was really critical, that the wood and the warm material was really expressed. In the modern times, Rotterdam had a lot of tough harbor materials, and even ourselves, when we expressed Scarborough Plain, was all based in that materiality of the harbor. But we realized that it's also important to have the humanity and the sensibility of humans, so we changed our direction to have a very warm, cozy feeling, although it's a very industrial city, but that when you come into that hall, the light and the tone of the light really makes you feel humble and you feel comfortable. And the second layer that we also work with, we really make a lot of emphasis to create or recreate the red paving, which was actually historically part of the paving of Rotterdam, and it's extending all the way out in Porfido, and it's also coming out on the plaza. So I think as a conclusion, one of the amazing things that we really like, again, as part of landscape architecture combined with architecture, is the narrative. So this was another idea that we brought in, not just the skyline, actually, which we really admire, and we brought it inspired of Grand Selton in New York, working together with Philips, but also the idea of creating this great screen that is almost Zen approach. I don't know if some of you have experienced to take what we call for instance, the Heathrow Express. You come in there, and all of a sudden they have a English countryside, very relaxed. There is no stress like when you enter Starbucks, there is really loud music. No, you come here into the station, and all of a sudden you see in slow motion how the harbor is performing, and it's really zen. And before you know it, you're completely feeling you're coming out of the spa, although you're just watching the harbor. And here you can see, basically, this is Rotterdam contemporarily, where you see that black tower at the end. The station wasn't there yet, but that's actually where the stations sit. This is basically the whole waterfront. That's all the area that got bombed, and for the last 15 years have been reconstructing themselves. And this is the footprint of the harbor, actually, which all of this area, which was former harbor land, now is becoming social housing. Here we could have some adaptive reuse. Actually, our office sits right there in the corner. And you can see that before you know it, back there in the horizon is the Northern Sea, where the new grove of the harbor is. So I think this is coming part of what I try to say by the topic of today and the acceleration of my speech here. And you can see here actually the footprint of Rotterdam Harbor, which is a municipality by itself. It's another entity. It is not the city of Rotterdam, it's the port of Rotterdam. And they have an agenda which is very simple, which is basically goods and grow every year 2%. That's their agenda. So they're committed that every year they have to grow 2%. Obviously, you are constrained where you're going to grow. What you see in white is or either landscape area or urban areas or other municipalities, but their other solution is grow out in the ocean. That's their constraint. And with the new marine technology, big boats are getting bigger, bigger and bigger, like the Airbus, so they no longer can come in the harbor. And the latest approach of the marine technology is to do what we call offshore, and therefore, learning from the lessons in Dubai, this is the results from the past 20 years. What you see in yellow is very interesting, is what they are demanded by the impact of growing into the Northern Sea. They have to give back with nature. So all of the yellow areas are landscape opportunities or landscape projects designed by landscape architect to mitigate and to generate what is called a building with nature. Here you see that footprint, impressive. This is all built by man, and this is where they feel very proud. This is the pride of the Dutch. You know, they say all the time they made it. And it's really impressive to see in the statement. And this one has an engineering background, so it's not an ornamental Dubai palm, but it's really about, this is represent their culture of today for the past 500 to 600 years, and making new land, and that acceleration really taking place. So after the years that they invested with Arcadis and Boscalis in Dubai, this is the result where they test back their technology back here. It's almost like how American military is testing their technology and then bring it back into the goods after the war. So they are very fascinating about the fact of making new land. And obviously when you talk about making new land, you're talking about landmaken, which is actually the tool of being a landscape architect. This also implies the economy of scale. The more land you build, the cheaper it is. And therefore that scale is in place. This is an early drawing, so we're basically we're only 30 years old. Our firm is only 30 years old this year, actually. But this was actually in year 5. We were speculating in Hoek van Holland, where you see that hook, that photograph that you just see. We were speculating in that time, we overpassed ourselves, but how this land will grow and how that will relate with the acceleration of creating new land in the Hoek van Holland area. But what I tried to here to basically share with you guys is we were even thinking small, and look what it tells us, where we are today. So it's almost a little bit frenetic to think, about the human footprint on the earth, and if we have this estimation based on Excel, but is that really true? How much more are we going to grow? And also has to do with basically the lifespan of people. This is an interesting book, and actually that Adriaan, my colleague and mentor, did. It's called Polders, and I don't know how many of you knows about what a polder is, but basically polder is making new land out of water. This is a classic 16th century, 15th century polder, and basically this before was water, but this was their economy of the time. So I'm shifting scale here, okay, a few centuries back, and what you see in this polder basically is all man-made, and in that time was made with cattle. Here you can see a profile of the polder, and it's all basically done very simple. A dike. The dike is basically holding the water. In that other side, the water is higher. Here, the water is lower. You always try to have a bike path, so it's the knowledge of creating a levee that is also a road, that is also a bike path, that is also infrastructure, what we call double agenda. You can see on the side the windmills, which is basically continuously with nature pumping the water out. And then in the back, the farmland. Here you can see basically cartography of the polders. So before this used to be a lake. I cannot draw it anymore, but this used to be a lake. You can recognize maybe here, you can see the dikes or the levees. You can see here in key points you have the windmills. And this is farmlands, and you can see here numbers and lot. So that's the economy. I'll make the polder, I sell it to you. You buy the polder land before it was water, so it didn't cost you anything. And then you actually create agriculture or goods. And this is, again, the 15. You can see the scale. So this is a farmhouse, this is road. So really you can feel there's 5 for kettles, and you just do the land. And this is the polder of today, all done by machines and machineries. And you can see immediately the scale change. You can barely read the canals, but they are straight, and they're all done in a Cartesian, almost actually AutoCAD way. But what you see here is the shift of scale, which is quite impressive, but at the same time loses that romanticism and is no longer human, is machine related. And everybody who live here in Flevoland, they feel disconnected, they hate it, and it's a huge problem in the Netherlands because it's really no longer a true landscape where they really feel connected to. And they always want to go back to this landscape, which is, I would call the moral stadium in the part of their identity. So this is the landscape of the future in kind of the heritage of the Dutch culture, and that's the landscape of the past. And I think it's very important to resonate that all of this comes together in this kind of DNA. I'm sorry for the language, but basically says when you create a new land, you create security, so you create safety. When you create a new land, you create ecology, which is a fact. When you create a new land, you create a new economy. When you create land, you create recreation. When you create land, you create a Netherlands. And basically that is their domain, which they practice from ministry level, but this doesn't come from one day to another, but that is actually present in our landscape practice. And those of you who understand, people who's educated in the Netherlands in the terms of landscape, this is basically embedded in their DNA, and this is what I learned in the past few years. So here, again, speculations. If we were thinking so behind in the past, thinking in the future, how long are we going to continue to grow? So here was just a speculation, maybe we should stop growing and just start creating a series of islands. Perhaps we arrive all the way to England. So again, evolution and the acceleration of that evolution is something that we question. All of these infrastructures are designed in a flood condition of 500 years. Lifespan has really exceeded what we thought of in the last 2 centuries. My great-grandfather, he passed away at 65. My grandfather passed away at 80. Probably, if I'm lucky, I might pass away at 120. Who knows? But that really has an effect in the flood estimations of the Dutch culture. Why do I say this? Because flood are calculated in 100 to 500 year planes. So that means every flood condition that was designed for a 100-year place means tomorrow, means in your lifetime you will experience at least 2 Sandys, because also our lifespan is changing. And that's part of the kind of acceleration topic that we'd like to share today. So if we shift the equation, not just in how much more our infrastructural land will grow, it also has to do with the footprint of the humans. So here you have a map of the Netherlands where you see in black the footprint of cities, and I think the Dutch culture has done that very well to protect their landscape as much as they can. Obviously, they are scared of open space, which America has a lot of it, but actually by the fact that they are really restrained, that they cannot grow in their cities, they're really constrained to work within the footprint they have, with the exception of the port harbor, because the economy has to grow, so they can grow 2%, but the cities cannot grow more than what their jurisdiction mentions. And I think that's very important. And for that example, I think some of you already know this, but the Phoenix Atlas was basically a book that came out from the Phoenix program, which also generated a very simple statement. It was the boom economy after 1998 in the Netherlands, and the socialists basically proclaimed an act to build 80,000 dwellings. And for us at that time, I wasn't even part of West 8, but this was one of the early days of West 8 installation. They made it in the former NIE. We created 80,000 dwellings in wood, just to teach and have an impression, what does that mean in the hallway? This is the hallway of the NIE, and try to put all those thousands of dwellings to understand really what does mean footprint and landscape and that relationship, and our responsibility as landscape architect to make those kind of statements. So here you can see again the importance of a square, how important a square is for cities to allow people to come together and to gather. And this is just a way of how to express in society. This is Puerto Vallarta. This is the project that I'd like to share today, because for me, this was a transformation not only in my professional career, but also understanding the dynamics of global practice for the first time, my first execution, and I'd like to have this opportunity today to share with you, which is suffering a little bit of that sprawl. Here you can see Puerto Vallarta, which is basically our project is right here, and the footprint of Puerto Vallarta started in the 1920s. It was this, 1920s, This is original Puerto Vallarta. And this is today. And the sprawl and how the impact of that landscape is really in an urgency to have some of you to become probably future landscape architects, but this is really critical in what's going on in cities today. And cities are growing and growing and growing, specifically in the American continent, and they're becoming more and more and more and more generic without identity. And this is what happens in the tourism economy. So they just build, not identity. You can see the city centers right there. People come here with an SUV, and that's their holidays, and they completely forgot about society and context. So it's also our responsibility to be part of that. Here you can see the latest towers of Philippe Starck, which is in Puerto Vallarta, and this is how they meet the ground. It's a little bit like Barragán, no? This is the neighbor. He had a problem with zoning height. Maybe they didn't allow him. And this is how you enter Philippe Starck's towers. And this is how you go through the beach. This is your easement. And this is what they give back to society. So actually, it's a really important statement what we're trying to do here. And I think it's part of our responsibility to become also a social practice. This is basically where they invest. So everybody invests, again, in this place, in the mall. And of course, in that moment, Mexico was going through the crisis of all the narco traffics and guerrillas and so on. So people was really scared to be on the public space. So they were basically coming with their SUVs and their escoltas, park in the basement, get out in the safety mall, and then just come out. And this is the beautiful romantic city that they forgot that even exists, where the identity and where people can mingle. And one day we had the opportunity to come to the city. They invited us, and when we arrived, we didn't know what was going on, but the waterfront of the old city was being demolished. They were upgrading the whole infrastructure of the city, and we met the mayor, and the mayor, which is sitting here, and this is Adriaan, and I was taking that photo, Salvador Gonzalez. He said to me, Daniel, basically I met with my engineer, and they told me we needed this upgrade because we're going to flood, and probably we might have a tsunami, and we have to really change the profile of the waterfront, otherwise our tourism and our economy is gone. There's a decay in downtown, and we need to upgrade. However, I don't have a project, and my engineers and my advisors are telling me, just build what you had in the past. What should I do? And obviously, he asked to the wrong person. But basically, this is the waterfront, and you can see the beautiful traditional Spanish, although none of this is authentic. That grid is just barrow, but this 1920s, 1910. The village, basically the old village, just start from here all the way there. You can feel here, this is a church, this is the government, and you can see here the footprint of the old waterfront, which was kind of mimicking the shore of the wave. And basically, we flew to the Netherlands, and then we came back 2 weeks later. Okay, we're going to help you, Mr. Mayor, but I don't want to have a contract. Let me just share what we can do with you. And basically, Adriaan said me, okay, Daniel, just come with a few ideas and see where that goes. So we came back and I said, okay, this is very simple. Waterfronts are always, it's a tradition, it's a malecón, it's very successful. It's actually something that you cannot miss. It's the nature of human beings. It's at the end of every street. It's composed basically by 10 blocks all the way, where it ends at the city church. So it's very beautiful, almost like Venice, where you turn San Marco. It's missing another turn, but it's an San Marco inspired, and then you have the tower at the end, and in the other end over here, you have the Fisher's Market. So when you enter the Malecón, you have right on your right hand, the Fisher's Market, and then all the streets are ending at the Malecón. So for retail and commerce, is the place to be. And so basically we would say, okay, we're just gonna provide you a series of recommendations. This is how we approach it. And we were basically seeing what will turn out. So I came back, and sorry, it's in Spanish, but this is actually my presentation. And I have basically 20 minutes of his attention, of the mayor, to share. Okay, what we'll do is this very simple. Before I flew back to the Netherlands, the engineers, you can do anything you like, but do not touch my engineering. And that's what the engineer says. Okay, no problem. I don't touch the engineering. So we didn't touch the engineering. We basically absorbed the profile of the engineer. Again, they have no much brain set that, oh, we're going to mimic the undulation of the water. So we took the undulation of the water, and yeah, we put it in. We put in all the engineerings, the quotes, the height, and what we basically did is we took the same profile. This is the same profile they gave us. So this was already part of the combo when they gave us the profile, but there was a flat pancake. There was no design, there was no public space, and they had hired an architect that was developing this, but he also didn't have the time to draw it, and we were against schedule. We had a year to do this. So basically what we did is very simple. We changed the profile from 2 car lanes to 1 bicycle path of 2.2 meters. And then the other one is basically 1 car lane where you can drop off or pick up. So it doesn't change the road. The road stays the same. It's just the use of the road. The second layer is that instead of having a wide sidewalk, we decided to split the sidewalk where you have a corridor for people for the retail, for the front store, and then you have an area for seating. And the next statement is that, okay, we are going to combine the vegetation. So just smoothing in, we're just going to duplicate the amount of trees you had. You had 1 palm in the past, every block. You had 1 palm every block. So let's duplicate that. And we didn't say for how much the array. And then the other one, we felt a little bit in the capacity of the waterfront that they were running short. They were really running short, so they were pouring concrete. They were all the way here, but we felt this space for the capacity in our experience of the people was really tight when, 1st of July, or sorry, Cinco de Mayo or 1st of January, people come out and walk. So we really felt the need of of expanding that. So the second condition, we say we don't touch the profile. The second layer is that we actually want to create and generate a series of views. It was really hot topic. This is the Mexican outreach process, my first time, and I really learned if you want to do outreach, is stop and quit, just talk to the people. Obviously, here in America, it's a little bit delicate. You have to always ask your client if you can talk to the people. But in Mexico, yes, go ahead, go. You earn it, you do. Go, you go into the bowling. And here you can see, basically, we did this on a sketch paper. We had an elevation with the architect, and we drew the trees, you know. And this is a window and a door. And we went surveying every neighbor, and they say, do not put the tree in my front door. Do not put the tree in my front door. I don't want to see a tree. I don't want trees. You're going to block my views. This doesn't work. We're going to fire the mayor. And the mayor with the stress, you don't go wrong. We don't want trees. But how can you do a project without trees in the public space for beautification of a project? It is not a project. And that was the same problem that the architect was having. So we basically went on a deal. And, you know, I'm trained as an architect, so I also want symmetry. So we say, okay, we start here. And then, okay, no door, and then we shift the trace paper and we glue it. Okay, this one is okay. So we went neighbor by neighbor, and we knocked their door. They say, okay, the tree is going to be positioned here, and each one of them voted. And you can see in red, basically in each one of the block, the tree was shifting, but it was the same distance. Here you can see basically a little model. So I came with this model like a full to each one of the neighbors, almost like a piece of cake. And I say, well, okay, we're going to take away your car. This was my colleague Maria. We're going to take away your car. She will take away the car. We're going to plant the trees. So we place the trees, and they say, okay. And they understood, okay, here's my door. Okay, it's not blocking the view. It's, okay, perfect. And then we said to the mayor, okay, Mr. Mayor, this is what you had in the past. These are the palms that they have one every block. Obviously, that doesn't provide any shade. So this is where he has a heart attack. So we're basically going to duplicate, as I said, in the profile. And then we start placing this. And before he knows how many palms it is, it's about 365 palms. And that moment, he was a little bit of an impact. But he took it like a challenge, and he really understood the ecosystem that we were trying to create, the microclimate, shade, and immediately he felt, wow, I want to be here. I want to really feel and meander and linger. So the profile was the same, but we were just adapting the top layer of that cake to be able to actually experience the human conditions. Those are amoeba planters that we inspired, and we basically place it modularly on the public space. This third one, I think, is very important. In Mexico, you can see there are hundreds of different furnishings. So we say we're going to create a new identity, furnishing for all. They're all part of the same family. So we design from the tree pit to the bollard, to actually the light pole, to this kind of flower pole, and two type of benches. And they really love it. And we basically explain it's a little bit of an evolution of our bench design. Here's some of the kind of inspired parapet. And here, this one. This one, they give me a little bit of a hard time because they say, look, and sorry on my discretion, but Mexicans are not very tall, and we cannot really irrigate this. And I think it's a bit of a problematic. So we also have to take the critiques in that process. And we actually revised it. I will show you later. And this is very simple. Again, the same concept what I was explaining at the beginning is like you should do benches, but very scattered, but you really should provide sitting edge conditions because it's the moment where, you know, a mama and papa or you and a stranger can sit down. The fourth part, which is there, is very important. It was the moonlight effect. This is actually Puerto Vallarta, is where in this case, if you recognize who's the person, that Elizabeth Taylor. Was like, at the time, Puerto Vallarta was really a mystic place where Hollywood were used to come here and fall in love. And there's part of that nostalgia still present. Now this happens in Baja California, but before Baja California, it was Puerto Vallarta. So we really wanted to bring that romanticism. They think that in security on the public space design, the more you illuminate it, the more safe you are. The more tennis court it is, the more safe you are, and it's not the case. And what we really explained, and this was the way how we could target to the Mexican economies and the Mexican developers, was the fact that, listen, if you over-illuminate, people who's coming from Vancouver, people who's coming to Canada, people who's coming from Chicago, they really are exhausted. They flew 8 hours. They come for one chance to come back again, and they want a memorable moment, and they stand at the top of the waterfront, and then they have a blackout effect, and they don't see the ocean. So these are simple things that when it's over-designed, so we wanted to bring and push back the lighting and have a more tunnel light, and this is designed by us and produced by Silix. So we brought them all the way, and then here you can see how the light immediately dropped down, so people felt comfortable in the base. And that was really actually bringing more people to the space. And here you can see the profile of the lighting. Obviously, all the nightclubs was already providing overlighting the street, so we have to actually work around that. Here is just a few feelings of that end. The last one, I think, was actually about identity. And yes, we were a little bit criticized, but you have to stand criticisms and learn how to work through the crowd. And but basically, we were asking, what is the identity of this place? And when we went to Puerto Vallarta, the first expression we felt, and we discovered this because we are outsiders, was actually this kind of river pebble roads. And it's quite beautiful because all of a sudden you enter the city center, everything is done by asphalt. And as soon as you enter here, you are really in the world of a Volkswagen really shaking, and completely you understand you're in a different space. And it's all made out of the natural river beds. So all these rocks come from that area. When we were thinking about the paving of Puerto Vallarta and the Malecón, the mayor had already bought from a quarry in Spain, Pórfido, and he was bringing the Pórfido all the way, which is part of the contractor, as part of the negotiations. So that deal was closed. And we were saying, no, you cannot do Pórfido. It really doesn't belong to here. Plus the craftsmanship, you need to bring all the guys from another area of town, and you need to bring them buses, because completely anti the quality of that space. And we walked with him through his sidewalks of the city, and we found that if you walk in the sidewalk, so the street is really bigger pebbles, but if you walk in the sidewalk, this is the traditional, so it's more surface for pedestrians, but you have this detail of beautiful kind of undulation, almost Burle Marx style, just going through the paving. And we said, look, this is what you have. And sometimes they terminate in this kind of opportunities. We might be a little bit kitsch, but this is their tradition, this is their craftsmanship. So we said to him, this is what you need to recognize, and this is what you need to bring up. The next layer, of course, we don't want to do this, but it's already very present. And although Puerto Vallarta is not really a cultura huichol, but there is an expression of this culture which plays here and also in Nayarit. It's really present in the artisanal and craftsmanship. When you go into the stores of Puerto Vallarta, you see this. So, there's a little bit, and some of you who are Mexican understand that there is always a conflict between the, indigenous and the folklore and the kind of Europeans and who acknowledge what. And for us, it was really a pride to actually acknowledge the cultura huichol. Puerto Vallarta is only from 1920. It's not really Spanish, so let's not do Pórfido. And let's try to reinterpret what they've done and actually acknowledge the culture of our pre-Columbian times. So we hired a Huichol artist, Lorenzo Benitez, he's him, and this is me. We were basically working with him, and we asked him to draw a master painting about the conception of Vallarta. So this is his first sketch. So in their culture, they did some sort of biblical with their gods, and it's all based on el peyote, which is a drug that you eat and then you hallucinate and so on. So he did this beautiful, this is in construction, yeah? So he was doing and all his fantasies and all the creatures, and the peyote is also the sun, and he brought all these layers of narratives. We were blown away, and we commissioned, we took this out of our budget, and we basically absorbed all of those creatures and geometries, and we started to abstract them. And basically that gave birth to El Mosaico Vallarta. This was our first impression, so when I came back into that trip, I brought this as a last card, or either we are fired or we go on. And they were actually not convinced, they liked it, but they felt, doesn't belong here, it's too progressive, doesn't really work. So I seduced them to actually test it. So let's make a little mock-up and let's see how it looks, and also let's see how it costs and who can produce it. So a bunch of fishermen show up, and they were trying to do it, and we did a few samples. This is the mayor, this is a leg of one of those creatures. We did a couple flowers, we did colors, and in a moment of a phone call, he was calling his contractor, canceling the stone. So he was convinced, and here you can feel the scale of the snake. So we were making different tested, was all done by the craftsmanship of fishermen, and voila, started. They felt proud, they felt really, they own their own city, they recognized their culture, and they come together. The most beautiful part is that the fisherman had an architecture student who, she was starting to understand CNC machines and milling, so she was doing the millings in Guadalajara, and she was bringing that in a truck, and her father was waiting, and they were placing the foam, and then the other fishermen were placing the stone, and this basically came into that resolution. And it's very nice because also peoples and galleries are taking this paving in some sort of a narrative that every day there is a tour where they walk and they explain the vision of the artist, but specifically these are all biblical, cultural, related that they can explain. It became so much of a fury. We were so much criticized before the execution, but after it was open, even Pineda Cobalin, who some of you might know, she took it even as that season theme. And you can see the scarf. They're actually very, very pricey. I wanted to buy one, but I couldn't afford it. And you can find this in the airports and so on. But it really, it was for us a great success to see how also fashion designers took that into the next level. So in a process of 6 months, we did this, what I just showed to you. This was my first experience. We did it about 4 months. 4 months of ideas. I was really in the global world. I was in Rotterdam. I was drawing a CAD file and then sending a CAD file, and then they were doing a laser cut, and then he was the guy producing the bench. We sent renders like this. There is no cut sheet. There is no telephone book, Governor's Island style, and insurance. No, nothing of that. And then they just started assembling, and the guy from the workshop where he was doing cars, he was just starting to put this together. You can see the bollards, which are also inspired in Del Peyote. We actually mailed those in the Netherlands, and then we just put them in a suitcase. They thought there was art. They were charging me 10,000 pesos for taxes at the customs, but that was actually our saver. So then in Mexico, that's actually they produced really, really well craftsmanship. So they took my mold, which was 3D rapid prototyping, and then they just, boom, created the module, and then the bollard takes place, and then the first marathon took place, and they run in Malecón de Puerto Vallarta. This, again, was very much criticized, and so we take it, we understand. This is Bob Pierce. Bob Pierce is actually an American who retired in Puerto Vallarta, and he established there to do his botanical garden. And Bob Pierce basically said to me, Daniel, I think that pole doesn't work. This is what I do in-house. So basically it's another pole, and then they just grow, and then you tie them and just let them be. It's easy to maintain. Don't do those flower hanging pots. Leave that to Paris. So we actually, again, we tied it back to the family of the furnishing, which is very important. You have a furnishing family palette, and we took that, inspiring the horns of one of the creatures of our shaman, and this took place, and before you know it, they were building it. I mean, I delivered a rendering, and 2 minutes later, it was in construction, and it was there. It was there. And I think the same with the rest. Railings, again, we chose culture, so we created this pattern. This is the kind of cut sheet we did. It came out, and it was there. This is the epicenter of the waterfront where actually the horse is standing. This is some of the module. We did this in combination with Cemex, and we created these modules in-house. We brought these modules to Mexico, a piece, a corner piece, and then you can see here how they come together. This is the mock-up. They're smarter than us, huh? So we in the Netherlands, we do solid pieces. So they're really thick and they hold the soil, say, no, let's save some material. So they did an L shape. So we actually evolved from them. And this is basically what we were working. So please send the planters, please send. And then the planters are in the fabric in the middle of production. So I don't know what to do. So we just send an AutoCAD file with the footprint of the planters. So they were pouring concrete, but they left the holes unprecedented because they were not precise. They just, okay, let's do it. The same with this. So they were pouring concrete, leaving holes. Then they decided to bring the palms. Then let's see if the pieces fit. They might fit, they might not. So then here's how they save costs. So with the CMU kind of blocks, they start building the edge of the planter, leaving a gap. So the pieces will position itself. This was all done in Guadalajara and transported, placed. You can see the first palm taking place. Here, while people was very busy, you know, my interns and students, they were really, I have to do this beautiful first. And while they were spending 1 week in doing this, next morning there was an email and this was back. So sometimes we have to learn how much we need to push it. And then this is the result. And you can see here how it comes together. And this is the overview. Although we were not very happy with the ondulation, at the end of the day, we just took it and think, okay, let's embrace it. So we created another edge that will actually tie up to the planters. And so we created this edge over here, which was actually working what Adriaan calls the eyeliner effect. So it was really reinforcing the undulation of the shore and really creating that space to people to walk. And this is some of the images. It was so successful, and here you can see basically the people walking on the street, on the road, that people would take over the road even, so it became really crowded. Those moments where the Amoeba planters comes in are moments of shade where people likes to sit, everybody's welcome. Here you can see the opening. Here you can see people just lingering and meandering around, wondering where to go next and feeling the essence of the public space. Arts are in place. Here you can see the view to the ocean, people coming together. By coincidence, nobody told them to see them there, but they understand their shade is our nature. We just do it. It comes out of our heart. Here is when the opening is coming close to the church and the curvature is opening, and you can see more present the scale of actually the city. And then looking back, I really like this image into the Philippe Stark images. So there is some sort of dialogue of the new CD and the old CD. So I really think that I would like to stop it here, that at the end of the day, I really believe what Thomas Friedman is coming across of, we really live in a very hot, flat and crowded world. And I think it's really important for landscape architects and urbanists to come together and try to give a little help on this. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. Hello? So whoever wants to have this, I don't know, any questions? You need this?
I don't think I need that.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
Well, you ended with this slide, and which talks about a kind of need for sustainability or resilience. But as you presented the work, it was more focused on people and how we as people occupy the spaces. Can you talk in particular about any of these projects, how you are approaching sustainability for this hot, flooding, crowded, since that seems to be important to you?
Yes, I think it's very important. And actually, I couldn't finish the lecture, so I went to slide 22012. It continues all the way down to 360, but I don't want to extend it any further. But actually, the next project with sustainability is very interesting. For us, it's very important sustainability indeed, but it's a layer that is embedded. And we feel so much that maybe that's part of the American marketing and branding, and you may heard Frank Gehry with his arguments, but we take it too much in the forefront. It has to be, it's your responsibility to bring the sustainability part of it. But sometimes we forget there is the other layer. For us, it's more important about the identity of the place. So for instance, it is very sustainable in one way to be responsible when you do a planting scheme, and the planting scheme, you have to really take into consideration the native species and the sustainability embedded with the surfaces and so on and so on. But in a project that actually I'm working next in Miami Beach, for instance, we have the challenge that we're doing a park, and the park is sitting right in the shore. This park 50 years ago was full of villas. The city of Miami Beach bought a planning tool, and in their planning tool they say this villas will become a park, which is actually that park over there. But what I'm going after is that park didn't exist 50 years ago, was villas. The planning document delivered the park. The park was never designed, so they demolished the villas, and you still have footprints of villas and old pathways, which is called Atlantic Way, and footprints of old walls. And nature took over. So that was the approach of the landscape architecture department of the city, let nature be. And now the city feels they need a design. And guess what? Now we forget our own roots, and now they say, well, native species. We have to kill all of the coconut trees. And then is that sustainable enough? And what is the real identity? And this is where I question, I get lost. I really get lost. And in my opinion, by extracting that amount of coconut trees that you have in the shore, it is not sustainable enough, And yes, they don't belong to here. That is true. But we also have to understand that the reason why our grandfathers planted the coconut tree there was actually to be more resilient in the land and to hold the soil. And that was that the coconut job is doing. Plus, is the only species that is actually allowed to dance with the strong wind forces and survive on the salt spray and create shade. So it's doing many, many other things. So I think we need to balance, this is my opinion, sustainability with what it's doing for us. You know, like what in this case of the Netherlands and the expansion of the port, yes, you might expand, but then you have to give back into those projects that are identified that is part of building with nature. There you go. I think there's one there. No? Okay.
So most of the projects that, if not all of them, were associated with waterfront. But then, especially in the States, like so much of the country is completely landlocked. And so like that's like what, they don't have that constraint, so the sprawl is a lot quicker, it seems like. Have you had any firsthand experience with dealing with sprawl in a landlocked, like no water constraining, and how have you approached those?
This is a tough question.
Say no, you didn't have a project.
No, that's correct. No. No, my specialty is really in the waterfront realm, and I've been working most of the time with waterfront related projects since day one, for some reason.
I have a question.
Aye, aye, aye.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Can
Yeah.
you hear me? Okay. So I think one of the things I appreciate so much about West 8 is that you lack the earnestness of so many landscape practices that this whole raison d'etre is about, you know, doing sustainable projects. And so very much appreciate the humor, the sexiness. There's so much that it's about that go into the projects. That being said, there is a kind of West 8 sensibility. And I can be at Maxima Park, I can be in Madrid Rio, I can be in Puerto Vallarta, and I recognize the palette that you're working with, the benches, the paving patterns, the planter edges. So how do you balance what you argue for as being the kind of distinct identities of locations with what appears to be a kind of West 8 brand?
Maybe it's a very good question. I think probably the projects I showed does reflect that brand very clearly. However, in our palette, I think we have other projects that are trying to step away of that. And actually the last project, which I was aiming to show, was describing a little bit of that sensibility of what is it to do a design that is not over-designed and that you will draw back. And I think in our practice, I have to say it really depends on the context, it really depends on the briefing and what the space is claiming for. So I think that really determines, before we conceive a project, how shall it look like? Yeah. And I think a lot of parameters are driven by either client demands, or sometimes the client is not demanding at all. So we have to reinvent ourselves and create our own paradigms to be able to make that resolution. But it's a very good question. It's a very good question, and you know, it's a balance that we have to create. Obviously, within our design, sometimes we even measure ourselves that it doesn't become over-expressive in a way. So we always try to pull back. So for instance, just to put you an example, when we were doing the mosaic, the first iteration, that collage, you immediately recognize, wow, this is West 8. But then when you see the execution, you say, actually it's very modest. And actually, one thing is the expression that you actually do, and the other one, what the execution actually reads and comes out.
Yeah. Speaking of you know, the water's edge and sustainability, I was struck when you showed the Rotterdam port expansion space. The first thing I started thinking about was rising sea levels. Yeah. And I know that the Dutch have always, for hundreds of years, have been leading in engineering about that, and we're learning so much from them. But I was really surprised to see that much man-made expansion beyond the edges of the natural land, quote unquote. And so how do rising sea levels factor into those kind of design approaches?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, in the Dutch culture, I mean, I am not Dutch, but I had a lot to work in the environment, and it's very natural for them. So it is nothing dramatic, you know. They know that the sea level is going to go up. Therefore, they know that their dikes have to go up. Yes, they have a very integrated society economy where they know they have to pay taxes, and those taxes are almost 75% dedicated to that water infrastructure. So you see constantly there are all the time RFQs and RFPs for all those firms to actually upgrade those water infrastructure. And it comes all the way back, from those experiments of creating land to be, to generate merchandise back in the 1600s. But it also goes even tied further back when they were playing with water as a factor to defend themselves from war. So really, they're water masters in that sense. So, there were moments that they say, okay, we're going to be attacked by the Spanish. We're just going to break the dike and flood the whole thing. And they were not skeptical about it. But they were really informing their people, okay, you shall not live here. You have to live in a compound, etc. So it's really embedded in what they call their horizontal society. And yes, it is design. It is what they call engineer. And you only see these dikes coming higher, higher, and higher. And that's a fact, specifically in the coastline.
Do you think there's an element of hubris there, that we've done it for so many hundreds of years, we can keep doing it?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, they do think. Although it's changing, so the global economy is really impacting, and Adriaan says it himself, it's really impacting the way how governments in Europe are really adapting to this capitalist and kind of different way of organizing the structure of the government. So you can feel, and I've seen in the last 10 years how the government is really letting go and having so much control. So some layers of the internal Dutch society is really paranoid about this because they feel that it's the beginning of the end. And, they don't understand that because, it's a very fragile condition.
Thank you so very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.